Lord, I call to you, hasten to me, listen to my plea when I call. Let my prayer be incense before you, my uplifting hands on evening offering.
Good evening. You're tuned into Holy Smokes, Cigars, Catholicism, and Conversation. Let my prayer arise in thy sight as incense. I'm your host, Dustin Quick. This is episode 117, Faith, Fact, and Fiction, interview with a Catholic historical author with Avellinas Balestri. Before we get into tonight's riveting episode, guys, just a couple of housekeeping announcements, actually. First of all, as always, Havana Palace here on Church Road in Windsor, Ontario, for the best service and finest cigars. Go see Caesar and Eli. They treat all their customers like family. If you would be so kind as to go to facebook.com/Havana Palace. Give their page a like. I and they would greatly appreciate it. Secondly, some exciting news. My merch website launched today, hosted by Catholic to the Max. So I've got some t-shirts, some decals, stone coasters, coffee mugs, and tumblers. I'm getting the 20-ounce tumbler on Tuesday and the hoodie on Tuesday. Right now, I just have the smaller 15-ounce and the t-shirt, but I'll be getting more on Tuesday. So if you guys would be so kind to support me, I would really, really appreciate it. This has been a long time in the making and finally made it happen from the connections there in Steubenville. So, just wanted to get those couple things out of the way. So before I let Avellina take the stage, I just want to read a nice bio that she provided me with. Avellinas Balestri is a Catholic author and editor based in the historic borderlands of Maryland and Pennsylvania. Her stories, poems, and essays have been featured in over 30 print and online publications. She has published 2 novels, Saplings of Sherwood, the first in a Robin Hood retelling series, and Gone for a Soldier, the first book in an American Revolution trilogy, as well as Pendragon's Shield, a collection of poetry. She is the editor-in-chief of Fellowship and Fairy Dust, a magazine inspiring faith and creativity and exploring the arts through a spiritual lens. Under its auspices, she hosted 2 literary conferences at Oxford and Cambridge universities, respectively. She has also represented the state of Maryland at the Sons of the American Revolution National Orations Contest. That, my friend, Avellina, is an impressive resume. Very excited to have you on. We've been trying to do this for a long time, schedule something for probably over a good year, but things just hadn't aligned, and now by God's providence and his grace, I think we're all good. We're here now. We're locked in. We're ready to go. So,
exactly.
Avellina,
And I'm so grateful. I'm so grateful for the opportunity, Dustin, because, I've watched your program, watched your interviews on Journey Home, etc. And, just have enjoyed the, output that you've done. So it's a real honor to be able to come and have this conversation. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks. That means a lot to me. Thank you very much for your kind words. All right. So before we talk about the literature and your passion, first thing I want to do is give viewers a window into your life. So how and where did you grow up? And specifically, I want to focus on what was your faith formation like? Are you a cradle Catholic? Are you a convert? Kind of walk us through your spiritual journey, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. So I am a cradle Catholic. I come from kind of an Italian-American background, also some other mixes in there, English, Irish, German, Dutch, French, Polish, a little bit of everything, but roughly 3/4 Italian and then 1/4 of the melting pot of the world. But that was my background, and I was raised in a very practicing Catholic household. My dad was a religious arts dealer and restaurator. So, I grew up surrounded by religious art. And that, I think, had a major impact on the way that I sort of process spirituality and the arts, and the way that I sort of leaned into the stories of the saints, because so many of the images, the paintings and statues and whatnot dealt with these figures and personalities from church history, these sort of heroes of the faith. So that definitely affected me. And even more fundamentally, really, just the presence of, crucifixes, for example. I've always had a deep draw to the Passion, particularly, as something that I think is the sort of root, I feel like, of the stories that I end up telling. They all are kind of retellings in one way or another of the story of the sort of passion and resurrection of Christ. So that definitely has affected me. And I'm on the Maryland side of the Pennsylvania-Maryland border. So I've been born and raised here. Cross over the border so often that, again, I identify as a Penmar girl because it's like the Mason-Dixon line is right down the street from my house. So very, very close to both Emmitsburg, Maryland, so where the St. Elizabeth Ann Seton Shrine is located, and Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, the major Civil War battlefield. So I get best of both worlds in that department, but I'm a proud Marylander in the sense that we were the English Catholic colony. So that definitely has influenced me as well.
Wow, that's really amazing. So now you're a cradle Catholic. Would you say that your faith was kind of like a slow burn in a positive trajectory for the majority of your life, and you just kept building on a foundation, and there was like an upward trajectory in terms of onward conversion or ongoing conversion? Or did you have sort of like like a lot of converts and reverts have this radical conversion experience where they encounter Christ in a new and fresh way, and it completely changes their outlook and their way of life? What was it like for you? Which of the scenarios?
I would say probably more slow burn, in the sense that it was something that I was always surrounded by. It was definitely always a part of my growing up. I was homeschooled as well. So, Catholic faith was very much a part of my curriculum. I did Seton home study. So that, always was sort of infusing me with, I think, the storytelling elements of the faith as well. Again, sort of the stories of the saints were a big part of everything. So there hasn't really been a time in my life when faith wasn't on some level important to me. I do think that as one goes through different phases of life, obviously faith takes on new dimensions for them, takes on new, as you say, depths, takes on new meaning. But it's all kind of held together, if you will. It's like there's layers to the whole, but it is a whole. So I guess that's sort of how I would describe it. There's one of my favorite poems is by John Paul II, and it has a beginning part which is, I want to describe the church, my church, born in me, not dying with me, nor do I die with it, which always grows beyond me. And I feel like that really resonated with me in terms of my understanding of, I suppose, my relationship with the faith.
Wow. Okay. So, I remember seeing something on Facebook a while ago. I can't remember who your confirmation saint was, but you picked them for a very specific reason, I think, and I want to know more about that. So can you tell me who your confirmation saint is and why?
Sure. So my confirmation saint, it's actually her feast day, Saint Margaret Ward. So she is one of the 40 martyrs of England and Wales. And her story, she's called the Pearl of Tyburn, which is actually one of my aliases in writing. So she famously helped a priest escape prison during the Elizabethan persecution in England. And she basically risked her life in order to save his. And she is ultimately captured, imprisoned, tortured. She's offered her life if she will recant her faith and attend Anglican services. She will not. And, she is eventually executed. And so her story, her courage, her simple, straightforward, again, just honesty and unflinching resolve, just really inspired me. When I was reading like some quotations from her, she just comes off as this very sort of straight-spoken English woman. She doesn't mince words. She doesn't, mess around. She's not going to cave. And she also is, I think, really a saint that's trying to bring out the best in other people as well, because she actually appeals, saying that she believes that, Queen Elizabeth, if she has the sort of heart and stomach of a woman, that she would have done the same thing for this poor man who was being so horrendously treated. So she's trying to kind of appeal to the goodness in other people, even the people who are persecuting her. So her story has deeply inspired me that way.
Wow, and that's Saint Margaret Ward?
Yes. So
Okay.
most people, there's kind of the three Margarets, where it's Saint Margaret Clitheroe, who's the most famous, and Saint Margaret Ward and Saint Margaret Pole. And Saint Margaret Clitheroe, she's actually connected to, because the priest who Margaret Ward helps escape prison was actually originally kind of an apostate. He had gone over to the Church of England. He'd caved, but then learning about the death of St. Margaret Clitheroe, who was crushed to death under her own front door, horrifically, when she was
Wow.
pregnant, it shakes him so much that he recants his recantation. And that is how he ultimately ends up in the prison, and Margaret Ward, takes care of the rest. So the two are intimately connected.
I see. Wow. Well, may they pray for us and help us in our
Indeed.
journey. I always thought the first time I was going to speak to you, you were going to have an English accent.
Yeah. I've had a number of people come to that conclusion. Yeah.
So what's the deal with the Anglophilia? Why are you such an Anglophile? Tell me about how that all coalesced and came about, and why do you have such a love for the UK? I want to know. It's fascinating.
Mm-hmm. So for me, it probably started really like when I was very young, with Robin Hood. Robin Hood was sort of one of my first loves in terms of storytelling. It just captured my imagination. So, then that was my first novel, ended up being a Robin Hood retelling, Saplings of Sherwood. And it was so many layers to that story. The parable-like quality, the paradoxes of sort of the good thief, the person who sort of challenges people and things which we take for granted to be representing authority structures and so many different layers, and basically makes us sort of take the world and put it a bit topsy-turvy. And it is a challenge, really, for authority structures in many ways to do better. So in many ways, it reminded me strongly of the Magnificat, the whole notion of, filling the hungry with good things and the empty being, and the rich being sent empty away. And this is, interesting because this is a part of the Robin Hood mythos, but also what is a part of that same mythos is the fact that in the earliest ballads, Robin is very Catholic and very Marian. He has this strong devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary, because this is coming out of very, very richly, deeply, devoutly Catholic medieval England. And so there's the whole juxtaposition in the stories of corrupt clerics and corrupt, lawmen. And then there's this outlaw, this person very much on the margins, who is more just, who is more pious, truly, than these other people. So it's sort of, again, it has this element of challenge to it, of who is truly, again, sort of the one who is following the tenets of the faith, the spirit of the law on a truer level. So the story, the legends, the way that they've developed down through the centuries just fascinated me deeply. And as I grew older, I grew more fascinated in that. And that led to other fascinations with Arthurian cycles and British literature in general and British history in general, and just kind of expanded out from there.
That's funny you mentioned Robin Hood, because growing up, I'm going to be honest, I never read any works. I just saw like cartoons. That's the extent
I
of
mean,
my
that
my
was the
Robin Hood
beginning for me as
education,
well. That was the
right?
beginning for me as well. Totally the fox.
But one thing that was never highlighted, which just surprised me just now when you said he's a devout Catholic and deeply Marian, I would never have thought in a million years to connect the two. So
Hmm.
tell me more about the faith of Robin Hood, if you're able to extrapolate that information from all the things that you've read and researched. Like, tell me more about his faith. That's really interesting. I would have never associated him with the Catholic faith at all.
Yeah. Well, basically, again, these legends, these tales, these ballads, they come out of Catholic England. They come out of richly Catholic England. And, England, out of all of the countries of Europe, was renowned for its Marian devotion. That's why
Mhm.
it was known as Our Lady's Dowry. It had this very, very deep Marian devotion. And that was something that was, depicted within the ballads of having, there's actually a nursery rhyme as well that goes, Robin Hood telling his beads, all in the greenwood among the green reeds. And that's the origin point of the name of my series, which is the telling of the beads.
Mm.
So it deals with the idea of Robin's devotion, and there's various stories where he will risk, himself in order to get to mass, risk capture, especially on Lady Days, so feasts of the Blessed Virgin
Mm.
Mary. He'll take time out to always be praying for his men, telling his beads, and oftentimes risking things as a result of that because he takes the time to do it.
Right.
And there's all of this sort of element that he takes it clearly very to heart. He's willing to put himself in physical harm's way in order to do this kind of thing. And his um, courtesy towards women, sort of harm ye no woman, kind of one of the sort of codes and of Robin Hood. He never will harm a woman nor a man in woman's company. And this greatly has to do with his devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary. It's sort of tied up together. So, yeah, this was something that I agree, it doesn't get covered nearly enough because it's kind of whitewashed out
Yeah.
after, England breaks with her Catholic heritage. You have a situation where those elements, those very Catholic elements, get downplayed and kind of scrubbed out a lot. And especially then in later kind of secularized movie and TV versions, it's hardly there at all.
Right.
And that's something that I really, really badly wanted to reintegrate into the story when I was doing, retelling, and to show how my series starts when Robin is a small child. So I wanted to emphasize how much the Catholic faith in England permeated every aspect of society and permeated his upbringing. So, he is in an environment where, again, his mother and father are instilling faith in him. And everyone around him, really, the world around him, this is part of his culture. This is part of his, reality. And everyone to a certain extent within this 12th century English reality is Catholic. Now,
Right.
they may vary on the scale of better Catholic and worse Catholic and in between those things. And we even touch upon some people within the society being kind of a mixing some elements of paganism and so forth
Hmm.
with their Christianity. But still, everyone on some spectrum is within the Catholic fold. That's the way this world works. And so, with Robin particularly, I wanted to lean into how his faith influences the way he deals with the injustices of his society as he's growing up. Because book one, Saplings of Sherwood, is all about him basically, growing up. So it's from the time he's about 5 years old, we open, to the time when he's about 16. And this is the first book is all about him before he becomes Robin Hood. He's Robin of Locksley, the only son of the last Saxon noble to have an estate in Nottinghamshire. And he lives in a world where his people, the Saxons, have been conquered by the Normans and suppressed and subjugated. And so he is observing the ramifications of that within his world, and how he deals with that is very much tied up with his faith. It's something that really does matter to him, something that's important to him. He's reacting to the injustices because he knows they fly in the face of what good Christian men should do and be like, and so forth. So that, yeah, that's a major aspect of the story, really.
Yeah, that's really incredible. It's the first time I'm coming across information of this sort, to be honest with you. Completely, I'm intrigued because I have a heart for English Catholicism as well. I've been trying to get my hands on a blue scapular of Our Lady of Walsingham, but no one seems to know where I can find one.
I don't know.
Yeah,
Have you tried the Walsingham, like
I
directly
have.
in Walsingham? Oh wow! So they don't have it.
I tried the Anglican and the Catholic stores, and neither have one. But yeah, so this is
I
so
love one too. So
yeah.
if you ever find out,
it's an Anglo-Catholic thing primarily, I think. But yeah, so back to Robin Hood. So what you're doing with your work is you're shining light on this otherwise space that has been completely blacked out of the annals of history, popular media, and so on. And you're sort of putting that back on the forefront for everybody to see in plain daylight. And like, that just shows the importance of your work. What I'm witnessing now is like, you just blew my mind. So if that was me and I'm just one person, I can only imagine, the however many people get a hold of your books and your work and probably have the same reaction. Because I always thought,
thank you. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. I always thought that Robin Hood was a thief and he just stole from the rich and gave to the poor. Is that what's the idea behind that? Is that, how true is that? Is there a grain of truth in that, or is it overblown? I don't know. I don't understand.
So, so in terms of the historicity question, is that what you're asking? Kind of like how much historicity?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would say that Robin Hood is a composite character, which means there's not a single Robin Hood in history, but rather there were many figures who went into the myth and the legend, the archetype of Robin Hood.
Okay.
So there's not a single Robin Hood. There are many characters from various points in British Isles history who contributed to the legend. It ranged from, Saxon and Welsh rebels against the Normans to rebels under Simon de Montfort's rebellion against Henry III. They had some influence, to various brigands and outlaws who gained some popularity among the population. Would end up helping those on the margins in some way to gain allies and so forth. You had so many different influences and characters. You had elements from mythology, sort of the green man type characters, the mischief makers, who like turn the world upside down. They're the topsy-turvy characters in folklore and myth. You have characters in those same things that sort of represent the forest itself, the life of the forest. You have characters who are there to sort of test your mettle, like Robin Hood does in so many stories, where he comes forth and like challenges a character to a fight, and if you beat Robin Hood, then you're part of his band. That kind of thing comes from much older mythology, and so there's so many layers to it, and the layers have just kept building. When you look at, for example, even the bare bones like stuff that we have written down, and again, this is something that was an oral tradition, so the oral tradition would have most likely pre-existed the written one by quite a spell, but by the time we start having things written down and referenced, you start to get just an understanding of how broad even the placement of Robin Hood is. So sometimes Robin is placed in like one reign of a king, and then suddenly a completely different reign, and you get the feeling he's a liminal being. He's not. You can't pin him down to one single place. And then, for example, the name Robin Hood started to become a term that meant anyone who was outlawed. And this is something that is quite interesting because some recusant Catholics got this about them as well. Where they would be called Robin Hoods, meaning like they're transgressing the law in some way. So all of that is just really fascinating. It's also fascinating, of course, just by way of the fact that Robin is such a Catholic figure in the early materials. So for Catholic recusants to be getting that title actually makes an incredible amount of sense. But but yeah, so it's very, very interesting. Again, Robin becomes different things to different people down through the centuries. And in some he's more of a ambiguous figure. Some he's more of an outright hero. So there's he's kind of he has elements of kind of the Reynard the Fox kind of thing. So and that's why they kind of leaned into that with the cartoon.
Right.
But he always, I think that something that always has remained is that he always does in the end come out on the side of making some kind of statement by merely existing, and shaking things up. So like one of the earliest poems of Robin Hood and the Beggar Knight is that Robin and his men are going to rob this knight, and then it turns out the knight is broke, really broke, and is having a really hard time, and his son is held for ransom. The stories vary in terms of variations of this, whether the son is being held for ransom because he was involved in like a sort of a petty feuding or something, or because he was in tournament jousting. Sometimes that was a factor in there, or at the wars. But one way or another, this fellow's son is in need of being ransomed, and so the beggar knight is very worn down in terms of finances, of trying to save his son, and he's about to lose all his lands, and he's about to lose everything. So he tells Robin this story, Robin who was about to rob him, and Robin is like, "Oh well, do you need a loan?" And so he gives him a loan, and saves his son and saves his lands and so on and so forth, which is completely opposite of the handling of the abbot of St. Mary's. So that sort of goes, again, it's that paradox of that the a person who's supposed to represent the church is unfortunately corrupt and is taking advantage of the beggar knight, and it's an outlaw who needs to set things right again. An outlaw, though, it's an interesting thing there. There's another story. Robin won't touch anything that's going to the church. He will rob like corrupt clerics, but he won't touch, there's one particular story, he won't touch the candlesticks. He's saying the candlesticks belong to the church. They're going to the church. So he has this, again, it's like he has this very particular code. And that's what makes him such a fascinating character, both to read about and also to write. Because, again, in my version, it's you're following this young guy before he becomes an outlaw. So this is before he's sort of, but he is starting to transgress the law in different ways. But you can kind of see where his mentality is being developed in terms of how he develops his own particular code. So he's a very colorful and complex figure who I think everyone sort of is attracted to a bit because of that paradox of the good thief. I think we all appreciate that because it does again bring into sharp relief questions about society and so forth, and really what it means at the end of the day to be following again the spirit of the law versus the letter of the law, and the nature of that at its fundamental level.
Wow, that's fascinating. So he wasn't just a historical figure, it was kind of a hodgepodge of myth, of legend, of historicity, archetypes, kind of all blended
Mhm.
into one person, if you could say.
Mhm.
Wow, that's
Like
really fascinating.
layers, yeah,
Yeah,
layers of a cake in some way, you know, and every generation, every age kind of comes back to Robin and you know, finds something there. And I think that there's another saying that Robin Hood dwells in all the forests of the world, and that's something that I think ties into that older mythos of the Green Man and all of
hmm,
this. But it's something that is a part of the human experience, a part of the human consciousness, a part of human striving, even.
mm,
So that I think is why. Also, I would say that Robin has this lasting power is because he is relatable in a way that I think oftentimes, I mean, I love the Arthurian cycles as well, but there is the fact that the development of the Arthurian cycles was very much as a sort of the ideals of chivalry. So it has its own purpose. I'm not like trying to denigrate that purpose, but Robin, because he's a little more gray, I would say, a little more rough around the edges, a little more, there's something in it that feels very raw and real in a way that Arthurian myth, with its kind of lofty, fantastical elements and its appeal to ideals of chivalry and royalty, it has its own purpose, and it's a good purpose. But it's something. Robin Hood is more populist, I suppose, more
yeah,
universal in a way that King Arthur is not. So they both serve their own very important purpose within British and world, you know, literature and myth. And I think they do both reflect elements of, again, our deeper selves and our deeper strivings, and both are very Catholic, because you know
right,
you mentioned the poetry book of mine that's called Pendragon's Shield. So it's named after the shield that in the very earliest, the Annals of Wales, one of the earliest references to Arthur, it's said that he carries the shield that depicts the Virgin Mary and the Christ child.
right,
So the idea is that, again, I mean, Arthur, again, he's another composite character and embroidered with regards to the romances of the Middle Ages and so forth. But on a bare bones level, he actually, I believe, did exist as a particular historical chieftain, warrior chieftain. And
hmm,
we have references to him in the annals, and how, you know, Arthur battled for the Celtic Britons, the Romanized Celtic Britons, against the incursions of the Germanic tribes, Angles and Saxons and Jutes, and and how he won these battles on behalf of his people, and thus becomes, you know, a figure of renown and legend among the Celtic peoples, and and we don't know very much about the historical Arthur, but he is very clearly referenced.
hmm,
So, you know, then later on, again, the stories take on whole new levels of mythos and so forth, and that's how we get the later, much more complex,
yeah,
embroidered stories of Camelot and the Round Table and so forth.
hmm, fascinating. So Avellina, what at what point did you have some sort of epiphany, or was it a process where you said to yourself, I want to write, I want to be an author? Like, what was the impetus for that? Oh, I seem to have lost Avellina for a second. Hopefully she comes right back. Hope you guys are enjoying this as much as me, learning that Robin Hood was Catholic through and through to the bone. Pretty fascinating. I never would have thought in a million years. Just wait for the sister to get back on. So, yeah, how are you guys doing tonight? You want to leave any questions for us in the chat? Any comments? You're more than welcome to, and we'll try our best to get to those. But yeah, I think she's back now. All right.
Hello again.
Oh, there you are. Yeah, we lost you for a sec.
All righty. Am I here? Am I back? Am I back?
Yep.
Okay.
You're good now. Yep.
Okay. So you had said, what did I have an epiphany with regards to writing? Yeah, I mean, I've honestly been writing or storytelling on some level since I was a child. It just kind of came naturally to me. You know, and yeah, I probably some of my earliest stories were Robin Hood stories. I would write them down in my journal, and you know, I would be constantly coming up though with stories with my. I mean, even before that, again, sort of coming up with stories with my toys and things like that. I would always be trying to put on plays and put on puppet shows and put on anything to tell a story. So that's definitely something that I think just again was part of my nature, very artistic.
Yeah.
But it's sort of funny because in this recent the recent book that I just released, which we can kind of segue into because I know we don't want to completely spend it on Robin, but the recent book, All Ye That Pass By, which is the first book in an American Revolution trilogy. One of the things that I realized when writing that was that my kind of artistic nature, my tendency towards the love of literature and whatnot, made it easier for me to write the historical character of General John Burgoyne. I found myself kind of relating to him as a artistic, literature geared character because he was a playwright as well as a general, and a playwright and a poet as well as a general. So it was something that I started to realize, especially after I had read some of his commentary on the arts, which again hardly ever really gets focused on because he's almost, you know, solely remembered for the disaster of the Saratoga campaign in 1777, which was the turning point of the American Revolution. And so he led the British advance down to Albany, or trying to get to Albany, never made it. And it was just kind of a fiasco for him and his men. And so we remember him mainly for that historically, but when I was reading his material of a more literary bend and his commentaries on it, it was quite interesting, and it gave me a new kind of appreciation for him. Like at one point he was commenting on how any type of entertainment, any type of art form, even of the lightest kind, should have some kind of relation to nature, truth, and sense. And basically the idea that there should be some kind of point, even to the most light entertainment. There should be something that reflects the human experience, the human nature, and truth, and sense. So that I think he meant sense both in meaning like sensibility, a certain sensibility that kind of is connected to truth, but also sense in the sense of in some way communicating with the senses in a way that deals with something deeper. So that was something very interesting when I was writing that. That I was finding that relationship, that I was agreeing and I was connecting and able to kind of tap into that personality type.
Okay. And how did you get into like revolutionary history and all that? That's interesting because that's not. I mean, the English thing I get. Like I get that now. When I think of England, I think of you. So that's that's an easy connection for me to make, right? I'm just so used to seeing that, and it's imprinted in my mind. But the American Revolutionary stuff, that's a bit more out of my wheelhouse. So yeah, tell me about that. How'd you get interested in that?
So I've been also interested. So kind of my two favorite time periods that I go to are the Middle Ages. You know, that was kind of my first love with Robin Hood and the rest of it. And then the long 18th century. So that's roughly between 1688 and 1815. It's usually put at. And it kind of, the reason they sort of put it like that is because many people call it like the Second 100 Years' War between England and France, or Britain and France after the Act of Union in 1707. But basically, what you end up with is a time of great growth and change for Britain on a global scale. And it's very fascinating time, because I feel like the long 18th century, the age of horse and musket, has a lot of fascinating material culture elements, because in a way it straddles the old world and old medieval culture and custom with the modern world. So you still have certain mystique connected to you. Again, we don't have photography yet. There's paintings. Our main mode of connecting to people. The fashion and the clothing and the style is distinct enough to really feel like there's a difference. And yet at the same time, the writing is not, you don't have to translate it now. If you're reading, English and colonial American writings, they're in a language, our language, basically,
Right.
for all practical purposes. So we can really lean into the letters and the diaries, the poetry and the plays and the speeches, and really kind of get really intimate with the characters and the sense of time and place in a way that one can't as easily with the Middle Ages, because number one, preservation of material is different, but number two, everything is translation at that point, because even in England, obviously you're going to be dealing with translating out Middle English and medieval French and things like that. So, and Latin, or medieval Welsh, if you're going the British Isles as a whole. So those type of things are distinct, and it's all translation. Whereas in the 18th century, you have that more immediate connection to the characters and their voices. So that when writing, the experience of writing it is that you really find yourself with this very vivid sense of voice for the characters, because you have read their material and you can take huge amounts, which I did do, of their real written record and then adapt it into the dialogue you put down. So you really do get a sense of these characters being very infused into the story. So again, I'm interested in the whole era, really, of everything ranging from the Glorious Revolution, the Jacobite rebellions, the wars with France, like the French and Indian War, 7 Years' War. Earlier than that, they had the War of Spanish Succession and the War of Austrian Succession and all these things. They were kind of like a bunch of little wars that could almost be called a whole war if you squint. But then the American Revolution is fascinating to me, because if one kind of comes at it from a Catholic perspective and looking at sort of the experience that England had of being in a schism from the church, right?
Right.
It always occurred to me, and this is what this story, the All Ye That Pass By trilogy, kind of is exploring, is that this schism from the church, the establishment of the Church of England and the general kind of severing of the British Isles from the wider body of Christendom is something that you can almost see as a parallel to what happens to the British Empire during the American Revolution.
Right.
Karma, in some kind of way. It's almost like a punishment, one might say. And that's sort of what I suddenly leaned into with the whole business, where I'm like, well, what if we treated it like a Shakespearean tragedy or an Arthurian tragedy? What if it is about these men, very colorful, very incandescent sort of characters like Burgoyne and others, who are in many ways kind of these latter-day knights who are trying to go and recover territory for their liege lord, and they're trying to hold together his realms, united and whole. And they're going on this sort of crusade of sorts, and that was the way I think Burgoyne really did see it. And he was a fan of Richard the Lionheart, which is really interesting. So he was definitely leaning into that kind of imagery for himself. He translated French romances about the Lionheart and adapted them into play form. So he was very much into that, and the notion of going and rescuing, for example, the loyal subjects of the king who were suffering under the yoke of this, rebel government that had been established, and he was going out to save them. And so what if these people who have these good intentions and have these good qualities are yet taken down by their fatal flaws, but also by a deeper underlying current, which is a certain, again, punishment, or a certain parallel situation, a parallel schism that is almost like the long ramifications of the split with Christendom. So that was something that I wanted to explore, and I wanted to do it through having a character, the main fictional protagonist, Edmund Southworth, Ned, call him. He comes from a noble recusant family that, because they're recusant, have lost almost all of their money and all of their lands, almost all of their lands. So they still have the house, but it's badly dilapidated. And they're just holding on, but they've been like this now for centuries. And they're deeply struggling. And then this is taking place in Lancashire, so it's in the north of England. Lancashire had the highest population of recusant Catholics, and interestingly enough, Burgoyne had ancestry in Lancashire. So this was wonderful for me because it just offered all kinds of plausibilities. So I have that Burgoyne is friends with Ned's father, Francis Southworth, who had lent Burgoyne money at a different point. Now, Burgoyne was very infamous for being a gambler, party man, so he was constantly coming into and going out of money. So and getting himself into all sorts of mischief, legal and otherwise. So essentially, I had the notion that, well, what if this recusant Catholic had lent him some money, and then eventually Burgoyne returns to pay it back in some way after he's come into some, and then is determined to try to do a good turn to the man's son. And at this point, the father has died. So I have the idea that he sort of takes Ned under his wing, is trying to introduce him to the world, and is trying, he thinks, to do him a favor by he wants to sort of set him up in the military. But at this point, you can't join the military as a Catholic. You can't own any weapons as a Catholic. You can't do so many things as a Catholic. You can't vote. You can't run for any kind of parliament. You can't go before the bar, do legal work of any type. There's so many other things. You couldn't own horses at various points. So Ned has to walk everywhere. Yeah. There's actually a very interesting story with regards to General Thomas Gage. So he's a pretty famous name as well, and he features in the book too. That his family were famously Catholic, very famously Catholic for a very long time, until his dad and cousin give up the ship. And they say the reason for this, well, they were going to confiscate their horses, their prized racing horses. And so they give up the faith, even though the Gage family was very, very Catholic all the way up to that point. So there was so many pressures to give up the faith within the society and to conform to the Anglican establishment, to take the Test Act. That's what it was. The Test Act was like the latter-day oath of supremacy. Yeah. And so essentially in the story, eventually, even though Ned resists for quite a while, for about half of the book, he eventually, for various reasons, yields, and he ends up in the military on Burgoyne's staff as a British officer. And he's essentially there to be mainly a clerk. He's not really supposed to be a fighting soldier. Yeah. But he's taken the Test Act, and it's going to absolutely tangle up his conscience that he's done this thing. And so it's very it's very difficult for him going forward, that he knows he's done this thing. And even though he's trying his best to convince himself that he's doing the right thing, that he is, he's freeing himself from being accused of being a coward at best and a traitor at worst. He's serving king and country. He's going there to be with his neighbors who are gone out on this campaign. And he feels like he's doing the right thing. But at the end of the day, deep inside, he knows something is dreadfully wrong. And that he's confronted with this question of greater and lesser goods. That's really the fundamental aspect of the story. So he has to say, well, what are the greater goods and what are the lesser goods, and how do we balance these things, and how do we balance all of the divided loyalties and questions that come up that are just exacerbated by the Civil War-like aspect of the American Revolution? Because I think something that people forget all the time is that the American Revolution really was a civil war. This is an empire at war with itself. The British Empire. Americans all the way up to this point had been British.
Right.
And so the idea that these are people of the same kindred that are going at each other, this just exacerbates all of the divided loyalties and complex feelings that he's ever had. And so he goes through really kind of a crucible experience over the course of this campaign, and especially because of it going so far due south. And in the sense that he filled with the sense that they are being punished in some way. So but not to give away everything, but by the end of it, suffice to say, he has gone through major transformations, and he's gone through a real turnabout in terms of, coming into perspective of who he is and what's really important, and the nature of his heritage and his name, because his name is Edmund, and in a way the story is kind of a retelling of the story of Edmund Campion. If Campion, instead of being a scholar, had a military career open to him, and if instead of being a priest he was a layman, and instead of being in the 16th century he was in the 18th century. So I wanted to play with the idea of doing a kind of retelling of Campion's story, because Campion's one of my favorite saints. So I wanted to do that, and I also wanted to shed light on Edmund the Martyr, who of course was one of England's first patron saints before George became the patron saint during the Crusade era. So Edmund the Martyr was a king, of one of the Saxon East Anglian kingdoms during the time of the Viking invasions, and he ended up, having his kingdom overrun by the Vikings, and being essentially offered, you can have your life if you will, make your libations to the gods, if you will become pagan and become like a vassal king for us. And Edmund essentially says, no, I'll die under the banners of the one true God, and that's the way it is. And then he was martyred. He was killed like Saint Sebastian, with shot a bunch of times with arrows, and then eventually beheaded. And legend has it that his head was tossed into the forest and protected by wolves, which wolves were the original symbol of the Saxons. So they were the original symbol of the early English. So he's protected. The wolves will not devour his corpse. They protect it. And so all of that was really a fascinating story to me. And so I leaned into that. And his name, Edmund, means defender of wealth. So the implications of that in both Edmund's case, both Edmund the Martyr and Edmund Campion, and Edmund Campion disguised as a jewel merchant just adds to that. But the idea of defending this wealth, the true pearl of great price, with their lives, is something that again comes round in the end with regards to our Edmund Southworth.
Well, this is absolutely fascinating. I feel like I'm getting a history lesson, a literary lesson. I haven't put on an academic hat since 2010 when I got my master's. That was the last time. That was the last footnote I ever wrote was in 2010. So it's been a long time, and I feel like I've been in a riveting lecture, and I've got the best professor, and all my attention is on what you're saying. absolutely
thank you.
fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much for sharing that. And Avellina, you did want to share with us a poem that you had written before we say
Yes,
goodbye. So would you do that for us?
sure. So, this poem is about James Radcliffe, Lord Derwentwater. Brief sketch on him. He was a Catholic recusant lord in the early 1700s who participated in the first Jacobite rebellion of 1715, which was ended in disaster. So he ends up captured and he ends up executed. But the key point is that he was a very devout Catholic who was offered his life, because this was the issue. They had spared some other people who had participated in the Jacobite rebellion, but they did not spare him because essentially he was Catholic and they wanted
Mhm.
to send this strong message to the Catholics. Um, and so they would offer him his life if he would recant his faith, which he would not do. So this is a poem. And the reason it's called Derwentwater's Lights is because when he was executed, the aurora borealis came over England, came over the north of England in particular, where
Oh,
he was
wow.
from, and people called it. They said, "There's Derwentwater's lights." They think that that's a sign of him having, essentially gone to paradise. So this was very much a part, and they still call it that to this day. In Northumberland, in England, they'll call it Derwentwater's lights. So this is the poem on that, which I wrote when there was just the latest aurora borealis over England. So
Oh,
that's the
wow.
context for that.
Awesome.
So I'll go with it here. Derwentwater's lights. With tears of joy in his eyes, he humbly thanked God for giving him this opportunity of testifying his love for him. Reverend George Pippard, on Lord Derwentwater's refusal to recant his Catholic faith in exchange for his life. Rainbow streamers slice the sky, mortally wounded yet undying, bleeding colors and spilling stars over Albion, merry in mourning, whole in brokenness. Since Brutus battled giants and Joseph planted thorns, slay the monster, prick the finger, suffer in victory, rejoice in defeat. And here they come, the grieving farmers, with their dead master laid out in a cart. Headless the corpse, headless the people. The bark of the hounds and the cry of the hawks echo the last hunt. For God was the hunter, and the soul was the fox. Yet the prey yielded sweetly, like a lady entranced, and agony became ecstasy. Martyred isle, own thy son. Rebel saint, holy fool, young lord, bestowing bread to feed thousands, yet refusing broth made with meat. No blood but Christ's gave him strength to shed his own upon the scaffold, where he screamed, "Sweet Jesus!" again and again and yet again, like a moaning lover whose heart might break, and they killed him as he screamed, and Albion was silenced. Severed head was held aloft, spilling crimson then purple, which streaked the sky and shone in the lake of Derwentwater. He knelt with his bride before they took him. He kissed his babe before they took him. He embraced the man pardoned instead, and forgave his foes again and again, and yet again, his voice trembling and his face white, as they scrambled for his clothes and wig, as if he were already dead. He clutched his crucifix, and so was crucified. God help us when we slaughter our saints. God grant that the wounds we inflict remain visible, as they did upon the palms of Christ. And if all other memories fade, our happy fault will remain. May the lights guide us as they guided his lordship home.
Wow, I can't really follow that with anything. That's phenomenal. That's phenomenal.
Yes.
My goodness. Thank you
Fun
so
fact,
much.
his his heart, Lord Derwentwater's heart was supposedly incorrupt. So he definitely is a cause for canonization that I champion. I believe that he definitely deserves that, even though he didn't make it to the official list of the 40. I'd very much like to see him at some point become canonized. So that definitely is a little mine.
Awesome. Well, I have thoroughly enjoyed myself. Thank you for coming on, and thank you for sharing your wealth of knowledge, your love of literature and history. It's been a great pleasure. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much as well, Dustin. Yeah.
Oh yeah, no problem. Anytime. I'd love to do this again. Do you have any parting words before we say goodbye?
Parting words? Yeah, just so if anyone would like to read my fiction stories or my poetry or some of the anthologies that I've participated in, feel free to look me up on Amazon under Avellina Balestri, and all of my content there will come up. I'm also available on Goodreads. You can greatly appreciate reviews if any of you do end up reading my work. Every little bit of reviewing really does help in terms of publicizing. So, I greatly appreciate it. And I would advertise at this point my author's site and my magazine. The trouble is, we had a terrible hack happen. So I think I told you about this in the past.
Right,
so at the moment, the links aren't working very well, but I'm hopeful that they will be working again soon. So I'm just going to put the links out there for future reference. So if you go to www.avellinabalestri.com, again, hopefully that will be sorted shortly. And also www.fellowshipandfairydust.com. Hopefully that also will be sorted shortly. Fellowship and Fairy Dust is always looking for new content. It can be fiction, nonfiction, poetry. We deal with kind of the broad sweep of the liberal arts. So literature, film, music, that kind of thing. We do reviews. We do, again, short fiction, fan fiction. We do a little bit of everything, poetry, religious commentary. If anybody would be interested in submitting anything, please email us your content. By attaching it and sending it to editor@fellowshipandfairydust.com.
Fantastic. And I have included in the description box, guys, Avellina's Goodreads link as well as Amazon. So if you I encourage you and implore you, please, to go check those out. Leave her 5-star reviews, and not just because I'm telling you to. The content is that good. You have to. So yeah, thank you again, and I think we'll close out here. And before I do, I'll just ask Our Lady of Walsingham to pray for us. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Well, guys, you've been tuned into Holy Smokes, Cigars, Catholicism, and Conversation. Let my prayer arise in thy sight as incense. I'm your host, Dustin Quick. This was episode 117, Faith, Fact, and Fiction, interview with a Catholic historical author with Avellina Balestri. Well, with that, I think we'll say good night and have a happy long weekend. Happy Friday. God bless you, your families, and friends. Good night, all.